on this iPhone 4 logic board for the iPhone 4 battery terminal connector repair. So a customer is sending his iPhone 4 logic board with a rip-off battery terminal connector, and all the solder pads are still there. So what I'm showing you right now is in the video right now, you're seeing the low temperature melting solder paste, which is it will melt at 138, 137 degrees Celsius. And before that, the clear paste you see, it's a no-cling solder paste from CyberDoc. So the idea is that you want to replace the existing lead-free solder that was already on a logic board, and you want to mix it with the low melting temperature, also lead-free solder paste. The reason being that what I'm gonna do in this repair is using the air bath method. And if you keep the original solder or use similar solder like the solder that melts at 230 degrees Celsius, would make this repair very difficult, because in that regard you will have to use a much higher temperature heat, a hot air or infrared lamp, to heat out the original solder used by Apple. So instead of doing that, heating out the logic board up to 300 degrees Celsius, which is very dangerous to the rest of the components and just too hot to work with, I'm going to use less heat to melt the solder. But since this solder I'm replacing with, it will melt at 137, 138 degrees Celsius. And so in such a way that I can, instead of using 300 degree to heat out the board, I can just have 200 degree would be enough. 200 degrees Celsius will be enough for me to heat out this board. So let's review the steps. First, you clean the board. You put some solder, no-cling solder paste. I prefer the synthetic kind of solder paste, and the rosin-based or synthetic rosin-based no-cling solder paste, which both you can find it on our website, CyberDoc LLC. The reason I prefer these because, well, first of all, they are no-cling solder paste, and second, it's the acid they use inside the solder flux, it's very mild. It's carboxylic acid, so it's not very aggressive to the logic board, and it's not corrosive, it's not conductive, obviously, and it's relatively no cling. It has a low residue, but due to the synthetic material they use, it can be a little bit sticky after you finish the repair. So I would suggest you could cling it. I mean, it's no cling solder flux, but it's good to cling after you finish your rework. Just mostly for cosmetic reason. So now you see on these solder paste, it's in really small. If you watch it under the microscope, it's a really teeny, 20 to 30, 40 microns, I believe, little solder balls. And when you heat it up, it will melt, then you become solder. So that's what this is, the gray stuff, the solder paste. And once you tin the pads with the new paste I put on, which is it melts at 137 degrees Celsius, you want to clean the rest of the residues and little solder balls that's on the logic board right now. You don't want those to stay on the logic board. For one thing, it's gonna make your repair inconsistent and it looks ugly, but more importantly, it might short something, because these little solder balls, even though they're not attached to anything, they're still solder balls. They can move around and they are conductive. So I mean, they're relatively safe because they're so small and they're not exactly touching each other, so it's not exactly conductive. But if you have a large quantity on it, when they dry it up, it potentially can cause you problems. So you want to dilute and wash them out with isopropyl alcohol. That's what I'm doing that right now in the video. I'm brushing the board with isopropyl alcohol. Unfortunately, there's a water sensor sticker at this location, but by this point, I'm pretty sure the warranty is void anyways. Um, I'm doing a soldering on the logic board. There's not much you could, like, you have to clean it with the isopropyl alcohol, so you can't really avoid getting that area wet. Yeah, so the isopropyl alcohol, even though it's not water, it can trigger the water sensor. Okay, so I'm done with so far the prepping for the air bath method. So you could do the prepping elsewhere, but for the air bath method, you want to dangle the logic board over free hanging space so you can fit a hot air gun underneath. The idea is that because we're going to be using a plastic made battery terminal connector for iPhone 4, and that plastic, in my experience, melts around 250 degrees Celsius or a little bit above that. You can start to see the plastic melt and smoke. So it will be best to not, even though you're not gonna use like temperature much higher to heat up this project since you use the low melting solder. It's still safer to heat out the board from behind instead of from above. So yeah, so instead of heating the hot air bath method is like you soak the logic board on top of the hot air blowing from behind the logic board. That way, the most heat is not hitting directly on top of the plastic, the heat sensitive plastic component directly. Hence, you have a better control of the and distribution of the heat. Flux in this repair right now is very important, especially good kind of flux. You want flux that can it has the vaporization temperature or boiling temperature to be around the melting temperature or a little slightly above the melting temperature of your alloy or the solder you're using. This particular flux is the white kind, QuickAlloy synthetic flux. I believe it has a boiling temperature of 240 degrees Celsius, and around that range. After that, it will start to boil, and you will see smoke. So it's a good indication of like how hot it's or the area you're working on with the flux, this flux, and also it's gonna keep your board, or at least the area you're working on, stable, temperaturally stable. It's gonna not get hotter than that boiling temperature on vaporization temperature of the flux until all the flux is burned off, essentially. And you see some since I'm hitting from behind, and oh, by the way, my hot air gun right now, it's probably set at 300 degrees Celsius or 300 degrees Celsius ish. But if you actually measure the temperature the logic board is getting, it's much lower than 200 degrees Celsius because the measurement you see on the rework station, it's actually inside. Well, it's measuring inside the ceramic heating element in the hot air gun. Hence, it's gonna be a lot hotter inside than outside. By the time the air comes out from the hot air gun, especially right now, I'm keeping the hot air gun on high speed. Low speed will take too long, and so high speed, and that just the wind and the high speed will lower the temperature dramatically by the time it leaves the nozzle. So if you want to be absolutely sure and absolutely safe with this, you can attach a thermocoupler sensor right next to the area you're working with, right next to the area you're working on, and measure the temperature on there. But since I know this flux melts at a certain temperature, and I also know the solder paste I use is a low melting temperature at 137 degrees Celsius. If it's not molten, if it's not melted, I know the temperature on the board is not anywhere near that amount. Hence, it's really safe right now with the temperature on the logic board, since I don't see smoke and I don't see molten solder. Smoke meant me from the flux, not smoke from the components. Also, on the back of this logic board, it was really nothing but a giant heatsink, and that itself is going to protect all the components inside from the other side of the logic board. So you can heat up as much as you want. It's very unlikely for you to damage anything from the back, as long as there's a heatsink on it. Even without a heatsink, all the little teeny components you see, when they reflow this logic board, they do this by machine in controlled oven profile, with a heat profile of at least 300 degrees Celsius, or roughly there. So this logic board is designed to be soldered with 300 degrees Celsius without damaging the components. They usually design the components to be 20 or 30 degrees higher than I don't know how many degrees, but at least 10 degrees higher than 300 degrees Celsius. So when they manufacture this logic board, they don't damage it by accident during the oven reflow. And since I don't have a soldering oven and I don't want to heat up the rest of the logic board other than this part, then that's why I use a localized hot air gun to heat it up. Okay, so as you can see, this board right now is probably somewhere in between 240 degrees Celsius, since the flux is not evaporating, and the alloy is being melted, the solder is being melted, so it's above 137 degrees Celsius. Once it's molten, like I did in the video, you want to poke at the connector a little bit, give it a little vibration and stress, so it can actually form a good join and bond with the solder pad and the connector. Okay, so this is the end of the repair. This right now you just wait until it naturally cools, and then you can clean off the sticky residue from the flux that we use. And that's it. That's the finishing product. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 connection being made. The 4 is the critical one, and the 2 other on the side in the back, that 2 connection for soldering, it's there to hold the connector down. So when you move the connector, it doesn't get ripped off on the board with the cable when you remove it. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. This is the iPhone 4 battery connector repair done with QuickAlloy from CyberDoc QuickAlloy.com.